our usual family vacation turned into a real horror when our baby Jack disappeared from the playground without a trace. The world turned upside down and we were plunged into a chaos of internal conflict and unbearable pain as we realized that our son was no longer around. He was imprisoned by a kidnapper, but this terrible chapter of our lives, despite everything, did not break us. We stood up and overcame the consequences of the tragedy. It was the long-awaited vacation we had been waiting for 6 months. We imagined how we would enjoy the warmth of the sunny Florida coast, listen to the sound of the surf, walk along the white sands and recover from the tiring workdays. We carefully planned each day, booked a cozy hotel room overlooking the ocean, packed our bags and anticipated how we would spend these 5 days, enjoying each other's company and creating unforgettable memories. We wanted this vacation to be a reboot for the whole family, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life and immerse ourselves in an atmosphere of serenity and joy. We dreamed of long walks along the seashore, breakfasts on the terrace overlooking the sunset and evenings sitting by the fire, telling each other funny stories and laughing until tears. But the reality turned out to be quite different. As soon as we stepped on the territory of the resort, as events began to unfold completely unpredictably, the sun was already high in the sky, promising a hot day, and a light breeze from the ocean created the illusion of complete peace and tranquility. Soon, however, this idyllic picture began to shatter like fragile glass shattering against the rock of reality. Our 6-year-old son Jack was always full of energy and curiosity. He loved to run, jump, and explore the world around him. Outdoor play was his favorite thing to do, so when we arrived at the resort, the first thing he did was rush to the playground located right by the beach. This playground looked safe and friendly. Brightly colored swings, slides, sandboxes, other kids running around, parents keeping a close eye on their little ones. We thought he would have fun and be safe here, and no one expected anything to go wrong. While I was unpacking in our room, my husband decided to go out and see how Jack was doing. We knew he liked to play by himself, but always stayed in plain sight. We weren't worried because there were so many adults on the playground, it seemed like nothing bad could just happen. We felt that Jack would be happy playing with other children and that his safety was assured by the presence of many attentive eyes. We were sure Jack would have a great time enjoying the games and fresh air. After all, who would have guessed that things would change so much in just a few minutes? We figured it was the perfect place for children's fun, and where the atmosphere was carefree and joyful. Half an hour later, my husband returned to the room. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line, his hands nervously rubbing his car keys. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible, as if he were afraid to say aloud what had happened. "He's nowhere to be found," he whispered, clenching his fists. "I've been all over the grounds, checked the restrooms and even the beach. He was gone." His words hit me like an icy stream of water. My legs gave a jerk, and I grabbed the edge of the table to keep myself on my feet. An incredible feeling of emptiness swept over me from the inside. It was impossible to believe that in just a few minutes our active and cheerful boy could have disappeared without a trace. How could this be possible? After all, we had just left him on the playground amongst other children and parents. How could he have gotten away unnoticed? Questions swirled in my head, but there were no answers. Panic gripped me, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. How could we have made such a mistake? How could we have left him alone even for a few minutes? These thoughts hit me like whiplashes, leaving deep wounds inside. Everything around me began to lose its meaning. The world that had seemed safe and predictable not so long ago was now a sinister labyrinth, full of danger and uncertainty. We stood in the middle of the room, stunned by what had happened, feeling the ground slipping away from under our feet. That's how, literally from the first hours of our vacation, everything went wrong. Instead of a relaxed vacation and family happiness, we had a real nightmare waiting for us, which was just beginning. We immediately switched into search mode, as if we had turned on our internal survival mechanism. The entire resort instantly turned into an arena of despair. We rushed from one group of people to another, asking the same questions, begging for help. Every person we met became a potential witness, and we grabbed every opportunity to learn something. Those first minutes seem blurry now, like the frames of an old movie playing in slow motion. Many thoughts flashed through our minds. Maybe he's gone to the sea? Maybe he's just hiding? But when we started looking for him everywhere, a chill of terror ran down my spine. "Have you seen a little boy with red hair and blue eyes?" I asked, almost screaming with fear and worry. People answered in the negative, some nodded sympathetically, but no one could help. Each rejection was like a knife to the heart. The resort staff also joined the search, but their actions seemed slow and ineffective. They organized patrols of the area, reached out to other guests, but it was all too slow. Each second stretched into infinity, and with each passing moment hope melted away, giving way to panic. Time flowed agonizingly slow like a viscous liquid. Minutes turned into hours, and every glance at the clock only increased the feeling of hopelessness. My husband tried to remain calm, but I could see his anxiety gradually overwhelming him. His face became more and more tense, and his movements more abrupt and jerky. "Where is he?" I shouted, dropping tears on the hot sand. My voice was broken by sobs, but I kept calling, hoping my cry would reach Jack's ears and he would respond. My husband tried to hold me, reassuring me, telling me everything would be okay, but his own eyes betrayed fear and uncertainty. Every new direction, every new place we ran seemed like a waste of time. We searched every corner of the resort, checking restrooms, coffee shops, playgrounds. But everywhere it was the same silence and no Jack in return. After 2 hours of fruitless searching, we realized it was time to seek professional help. We went to the resort management. The managers immediately called the police, and soon a squad of officers arrived on the scene. The officers acted promptly and professionally. They questioned us about everything that might be relevant. When we had last seen Jack, what he was wearing, what his special signs and habits were. Then they began methodically combing the resort grounds, using sniffer dogs and drones to look in hard-to-reach places. We were left to wait for news, sitting in the administration office. At times, police officers stopped by to clarify details or update us on the progress of the investigation. But each time the news was the same. No trace of Jack had been found. My nerves were frayed. Every sound of footsteps outside made us jump up and down, hoping to hear good news. But as time passed, Jack was still nowhere to be found. The police expanded the search area to include surrounding neighborhoods and roads, but there were no results. This moment became one of the hardest of our lives. We realized that every hour without news of Jack diminished the chances of successfully completing the search. But despite our despair, we continued to hope and believe that our son would be found alive and well. Panic grew by the minute, like a snowball rolling down the side of a mountain. We frantically updated social media pages, hoping to see any information about Jack. Posts with his picture spread at the speed of light. Friends and strangers shared them and offered help, but there was no word. Each ring of the phone brought a new burst of hope, but each time turned out to be a false alarm. My husband tried to reassure me, but his voice shook with tension. We had never experienced such fear and helplessness. We were usually a supportive team, but in this chaos our emotions took over. First came the quiet questions that sounded like accusations. "Why did you let him go alone? Couldn't we have watched more closely?" Then they escalated into loud accusations that tore us apart. "Why did you leave him alone?" I spat out, unable to control my feelings. "I just stepped away for a minute," he snapped, trying to justify himself. Our relationship was beginning to fray. What should have brought us closer together suddenly turned us into enemies. We couldn't hear each other anymore. Each of us immersed in our own fears and guilt. The atmosphere around us became heavy, filled with mutual resentment and anger. We seemed to have forgotten that we were in the same camp, that our common goal was to find Jack and bring him home safe and sound. 5 days turned into an endless series of unsuccessful searches and internal struggles. Each morning began with the hope that today we would find Jack, but the evening brought only fatigue and frustration. Our nerves were strained to the limit, and every hour brought new trials. We stopped talking to each other, preferring silence and avoiding glances. The resort, which was supposed to be a vacation destination, became a prison of our fears and doubts. We walked the grounds like shadows, unable to see anything around us. Every sound, every rustle made us flinch, but nothing came to fruition. Time dragged on endlessly, and with each passing day our bond grew weaker. We ceased to be family, becoming two strangers bound by a common tragedy. What was the turning point? Perhaps it was the moment we realized it was no one's fault. No one could have predicted what would happen. But the realization came late, when our hearts were already broken. We had lost more than just a child. We had lost faith in ourselves and in each other. Would we ever go back to our old relationship? Would we have been able to rebuild the trust and harmony that had been destroyed? That question remained open, and the answer depended solely on ourselves. Would we be able to find Jack and overcome this crisis and return to normalcy? Or would this experience change our lives forever? When 5 days of vacation at the resort had passed, we needed to leave. But how could we leave? Jack hadn't been found yet. The police assured us that they would keep the situation under control and update us on the progress of the investigation. With heavy hearts, we packed up and headed home. All the way home I cried, and my husband was glum and sad. Every kilometer of the journey home seemed endless. We were silent, immersed in our thoughts and worries. I couldn't stop thinking about Jack, imagining where he was, what was happening to him. Tears streamed down my cheeks, leaving salty marks on my skin. My husband held the steering wheel tightly, his hands shaking slightly, but he tried to keep his composure. There was pain and confusion in his gaze. We didn't speak because we couldn't find the words to express our inner struggle. Each of us struggled with guilt and helplessness. We asked ourselves the same questions. How could we have lost him? Why weren't we careful enough? What did we do wrong? The answers to these questions remained as inaccessible as the fog hiding the horizon. The house seemed foreign and empty when we finally drove into our yard. Without Jack, it had lost its warmth and coziness. We stepped inside, but instead of the familiar feeling of coming home, we were greeted by an oppressive silence. In every corner of the house we searched for signs of Jack's presence, but everything was empty. His room remained untouched, his toys scattered across the floor as if he had just come out to play. We collapsed on the couch, unable to cope with the emotions that had come over us. My husband put his arm around me and we sat like that for a long time without saying a word. Thoughts flashed through my mind that our lives would never be the same. 3 days later, we received a call from the police. We had been waiting for this call for a long time, and we listened to every word with trepidation. The police officers told us that we needed to come to the station. We drove in silence, tense. When we got there, we were escorted to a room and left alone. A few minutes later, the door opened and a policeman led us into the office. Jack. It was Jack. We couldn't believe our eyes. On our way here, we were prepared to expect any outcome, even the worst. We rushed to him and he rushed to us. As we hugged each other, we couldn't hold back our tears. Police told us that Jack was apprehended on a train as he crossed the state line. A middle-aged woman was with him. She took him away from the playground, saying she'd take him to her parents. It was eventually discovered to be a child abduction ring. The perpetrators were brought to trial. The woman claimed to have acted alone, but police suspected much larger forces were behind it. The investigation continued, and each day brought new details. It turned out that the woman was part of an international criminal gang involved in human trafficking. Their goal was to kidnap Jack and smuggle him overseas to be sold. We learned that the group worked according to a well-established scheme. They tracked children in popular tourist resorts, chose those who are temporarily left unattended, and used psychological tricks to lure them. The woman who kidnapped Jack used a simple trick. She said she had found a small kitten that was lost and asked Jack to help her carry it back to its mother cat. Jack, being a kind and helpful boy, couldn't resist the request to help the animal. He followed the woman, not realizing what awaited him. The trial of the group of kidnappers lasted several months. The woman was sentenced to a long prison term, and the other members of the gang also received serious sentences. We were grateful that justice had been served, But the emotional wounds of the experience took a long time to heal. It took Jack a while to recover from what had happened. Psychologists worked with him to help him deal with the trauma. We also went to therapy to learn to cope with our own fears and anxieties. Gradually, our lives began to return to normal. But this incident changed us forever. We became more cautious, more attentive to the little things and appreciative of every moment we spent together. Despite all the difficulties, we managed to get through this crisis and become closer to each other.